A simple but important question. Why do we bother to save, and how should we think about going about it? So, why save? Why not just spend money as it comes in? Why think about the difference between what we receive as income, salary for argument's sake, and our costs, and try and save a bit of that difference? Well, here's a grim answer. A rainy day fund of 3 to 6 months' salary is what we'd advise as a cushion. Against what? Well, you never know what's around the corner. Short term, redundancy, illness, or an emergency, that leaky roof or fixing the car. So there's one reason to save, but it's not a very cheerful reason. There are more cheerful reasons to save. It is to make sure we don't get some horrible surprises in the future when expenditure suddenly crops up that we weren't expecting. All right, we ought to be planning for holidays and treats, short term. We ought to be planning for that house deposit. Where's it going to come from? And or our own wedding, or if you're a parent, paying for your children's weddings. Longer term, there's the kids' education to worry about, especially if you're going to go down the private school route. Retirement, who's going to pay for that? Will it be the government? Well, don't rely on it, don't trust it. Who will it be? Some sort of retirement pot is needed. And long-term care. Those nursing home fees right at the end of life, who's going to come up with those? So there are lots of reasons to try and set money aside. Now, to achieve all of these goals, we need to do it in some sort of systematic way. So let's take a look at what that might be. Let's outline that in this video. The best ways to save. Some rules of thumb. When allocating your money, there is a risk-return trade-off. In essence, you've got to take a bit more risk in order to generate decent returns. And by decent, I mean inflation beating. More about that in a moment. Some rules of thumb. Think about price risk. That's the risk the thing goes down as well as up. What I'm saying here is if you're going to need the money back in 8 months' time, don't take a lot of price risk, because you need to know that the £100 you put in is going to be at least £100 when you pull it out. All right? Liquidity risk is the risk that you want to pull your money out, and maybe it's still £100, but you can't, all right, because there isn't a market at the time for the investments you're trying to liquidate. Watch out for that one in relation to things like property, for example. And default risk. That's simply you put your money into something which goes bust, so you never get your money back, let alone £100 back. Now, basically, those are three things that need to be sort of managed in the context of saving and investing. But the golden rule is this. If you're going to need the money back in the short term, make sure it's somewhere where it is safe and accessible. All right, so in other words, don't take on too much price or liquidity risk, let alone default risk. Medium to long term, though, if you are going to beat inflation, build up a meaningful sum, get that house deposit together, pay for retirement, you're going to need to look somewhere else. All right, you need to take a bit more risk. Now, the reason is inflation. So what are these things that people call real returns? And really, it's real returns that matter. Very simple example. Let's say you invest hoping to earn 6% per year before inflation is taken into account. The inflation rate is 2%. What is that again? That is the rate at which the price of the things that you want to buy, goods and services, is increasing annually, 2%. We're used to inflation in the UK, for example. Things tend to increase in price over time, with a few exceptions. But generally, inflation is all about rising prices. So your real post-inflation return, that's what the word means, post-inflation, your real return is actually 6 minus 2, which is 4. Respectable, you might say, all right, but nonetheless, 4%, not 6%. And that's worth bearing in mind, because if you sit in cash, here's the problem. If you're earning less than 2%, let's say you've got a cash account that pays 1.5%, very low risk, very price stable. The problem is, if inflation is 2%, even if we ignore tax, which is another problem, if inflation is 2%, you're losing money all the time in real terms by staying in cash. And that's something that as a saver or investor you do need to think about for medium and long-term returns. Yeah, damp squib on the right-hand side there. So, where are we going to look to generate the kinds of returns we need over those different time frames? Well, short-term, cash and bank accounts have their place for the rainy day money, for example, all right, for that holiday money. They're safe and accessible, but you're not going to beat inflation, or it's very unusual. 4, medium-term funds, stuff you don't need back immediately, but isn't committed to long-term investing. Maybe we can look for something that's sort of a midpoint that offers better returns than cash, but without taking too much extra short-term risk. So fixed income securities or bonds, which we'll look at in future videos, might be a good place for your money. In other words, I'm suggesting here in this starter video, there are places you can invest that give a kind of cash-like return, but offer a little bit more return than pure cash. For longer term, medium to longer term, we're going to have to take a bit more risk. Now, when I say a bit more risk, what I mean is in the short term, we're going to have to accept a bit more price volatility, all right, in order to generate long-term returns. And two assets stand out, shares and property, as potentially being able to offer that. It's a good idea to aim to own your own main home. That gives you emotional, personal and financial security. But beyond that, as we'll point out later, property has its pitfalls. Shares, therefore, can be a great place to earn decent long-term returns. And we're going to take all of these on in more detail in future videos. Yes, with shares, they go down as well as up. There's short-term risk, but you can manage that to generate decent long-term returns. Now, I'm going to finish with a point about how much damage inflation can do to people who just sit in cash. Tempting though sometimes that might be as an option. Let's say you've kept £1 since 1969. All right, so we're going back sort of 45 years, 2 years after I was born. What would it be worth now in real terms? And this is a wee bit frightening. It'll look the same. It'll weigh the same. You could take it out of the top drawer, let's say, assuming that you had the same currency back in 1969. You got your pound, but what does it actually buy? In real terms, its purchasing power has been reduced to just under 7 pence over that time frame. So there you can see that cash may be safe, it may be accessible, it may be a good place for short-term money, but it's not risk-free when you take inflation into account. More on all those themes coming up in future videos.